Hi guys, I am back for a second tutorial, and today I am going to teach you guys how to paint this awesome snowy peak mountain using watercolor and gouache. Let's get started. Let's quickly go over the materials. As mentioned before, we're going to be using watercolor and gouache. So I just want to show you guys just the stuff that you'll need. So I have this watercolor palette and this MIYA gouache set that I got off of Amazon. I will include the links below. I used the watercolor to go as a base bottom, and then the gouache was layered on thickly. So it will be important for you guys to get really heavy watercolor paper. Anything else will warp and it won't last. This is the kind of paper I use. It's the Canson watercolor 9 by 12 inch sheets of paper. I cut them in half just so that I have more to practice on, but this is the only paper that's going to hold this much water and just kind of gouache without it warping. So I strongly recommend you get this kind of paper. All right, let's start by looking at the reference picture. I've included a link below. So we're not going to make it look exactly like this, right? This is just a reference, but notice that on the left side, we're gonna have a shade darker than the right. The right side is where the sun hits, and that's the effect that we want. So we're going to start off by drawing in our mountain, and I'm adding hills. I'm drawing out my border because I like my borders messy. Feel free to add as many hills as you want, or just follow along exactly what I'm doing. That helps me practice as well when I follow other tutorials. So we're going to draw in the mountain, and I am breaking it up in different parts because this is what's going to help us know where to place those colors. So you see here that the mountain is broken up so far in 3 parts. The left side, we want that, long slab. And then on the right side, I've broken it up in 3 parts, which I'm going to break up one more time and add that right there. And this is just going to help us know where the lighting is hitting it, where we're going to need those shadows, those breaks in the mountains, right? Let's take a look at the reference photo again. There you go. So, all right, let's get back to the mountain. We're going to start with our watercolor. So let's get our watercolor palette, and remember, we're using watercolors for the base. Here we're going to pick some blue up, and we're going to add water, as much water as we can to it, because we don't want the sky to be a very strong blue. We want it to be soft and just kind of almost see-through when you kind of brush your brush over the paper. So keep on adding to it. If you need to add a little bit more of a darker blue, go ahead. And don't worry about it spreading onto your mountain or the hills, because don't forget, we're going to use gouache after placing those base colors. And once you add the gouache, it's so opaque that it's just going to completely block any of the watercolor that you get onto the mountain. So go ahead and add a little bit of blue, add maybe some water droplets randomly, and get that cloudy, blue sky effect. So for the base of the mountain and the hills, we'll be using watercolor as well. Don't forget, we've got the 2 hills at the front. So the very front one on the right is a silhouette, and the left one is a little bit more distant. So we're going to add some brown to it. I wasn't too sure where I was going with this at first, actually. So for now, add some brown. It doesn't have to be perfect because remember, this is just the base. We're going to use gouache once we got the whole base covered. And gouache is so opaque that it's actually going to cover a lot of those imperfections. And sometimes those imperfections are what makes the painting just so great. So go ahead and add some brown to that hill on the left. And we're going to add brown to the mountain itself. So remember, the left side of the mountain, it's in the shadows, so it's going to be darker. And the right side of the mountain is a little bit lighter. That center is kind of in between. It's still a little dark. So do your best to pick the kind of the best shade of brown. Here, I was thinking about using gouache, but I actually ended up going with watercolor. And, you know, just FYI, this is a voiceover. I usually do voiceovers when I just kind of run out of things to say when I'm not recording and it's going on live. So we're going to go ahead and add brown to the mountain. And this is going to be a lighter. So right side, the light hits it, it's going to be a lighter brown. And as said before, don't worry about any imperfections or any, you know, brush strokes that look too brush strokey, if that makes sense. Just because sometimes either those brush strokes are what add detail or they're just going to be covered up with more paint. So that side is light brown, and we're going to make the middle kind of slightly darker, but not too much. And where we drew the lines in the mountain, kind of breaking them up, don't paint over them. Leave a little bit of paper just open there, because we're going to go back and make sure to define those lines that break up the mountain itself. As you're painting the mountain, something that, you know, you might come across is adding too much water. Watercolor is kind of finicky like that, right? So the first time I tried watercolors, I was just using too much water and it spread. So be careful how much water you use. Here, if you have an excessive amount, it might mix with the sky. So be mindful, always start off by maybe painting the center of what you're trying to accomplish to see where the water spreads, and it'll be easier to clean with a napkin. So we just got done placing that darker brown on the left side, and now we're going to go back on the right side. If you look at your reference photo, the right side of the mountain, while the sun still hits it, there is that side that's kind of further back. So we want to make that just a little bit darker. Once you've let your browns dry, now we're going to go back and shift our focus back to that front silhouette hill, and we're going to make it black. Don't add too much water to it. The less water that you add, the more vibrant or opaque the color is. And we want that front hill to be black because it's a silhouette. We're behind it, or maybe it's rock. I'm not sure. In this case, it's a silhouette, so just make it black and opaque. Once you finish that hill at the front, the silhouette, let's go to our back mountains that are right behind our star mountain. And let's make them a very dark gray. So now that our mountain is dry, we're going to go ahead and get ready for our gouache. Notice that the top of the mountain is kind of a little bit blended in with the sky. Like we talked about, you know, if you use too much water, it will spread. But no worries, we'll go over it with the gouache that we're about to place. So let's use a small flat brush, and we're going to use a very, very dark brown. And that dark brown is going on the left side where it's in the shadows, no light is hitting it, and we want it to be as dark as possible. Make sure that your gouache is thick and gooey. It's not too watery. We want it to be thick because we're going to apply it with a dry brush. So we're going to go ahead and outline that peak with the flat brush and just run it through very quickly. And if it's dry and it's leaving all these little streaks, no worries. We want it to look rough. Keep in mind that gouache is very similar to acrylics, so it dries pretty quickly. So if you find that your gouache on the palette is drying out way too quickly for you, add like a drop of water, not too much because we don't want it to activate the watercolor that's already underneath it. So we have that darker shade on the left side now. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of white and some yellow to it because the sun's hitting it, right? So it's adding that yellow lighting. So we'll want a little bit of yellow, some white, and mix it in with that brown that's already on your palette. Make sure that it's got that same thick and gooey consistency because we want to lay it on thick. We want that roughness, you know, that the roughness that you see on rocks, the weird shadowing. It's very imperfect. So don't worry about it being perfect or giving it full coverage. All we want is kind of those rough, jagged looking lines and crevices that we see in rocks. So we're going to go back and outline those empty spaces that we left on the paper using black. And here I used a very small, thin brush to draw in and fill in those black outlines. Leave that center line just out in the open. We're not going to outline it black. And let's get started on the snow. So the snow on the left side, we're going to mix it with some brown because while it's snow and it's white, it's still in the shadows, so it's going to be kind of an off-white. And we'll go ahead and add it with a small flat brush. And we want that same consistency again, right? We want it to be kind of thick, gooey, and we're going to apply it with a very dry brush. Now, if you have the palette like I do, sometimes they're too dry, so I have to add a drop of water just to make sure I get that consistency I'm looking for. Taking a quick look here at our reference picture, notice that there's a lot of snow in the center, so we're going to start there and just kind of spread it out. I noticed while doing this that it was really watery, so what I did is I got another brush that was dry, and it kind of helped me spread the paint so that it could not just dry faster, but it kind of had that roughness to it. And you'll see that right now. I decided at the last minute to use that same white and add snow to that hill on the left, just because I feel like it added a little bit, I guess, more character to it. I'm not sure. I sometimes, you know, as I go, I kind of figure out that I didn't want things to look a certain way, or I just want to add more stuff to it. So feel free to leave it bare or add snow. So now we're going to shift over to the right side. I added just a tiny bit more of white, and with a very small thin brush, I went in and just kind of randomly added details. And I just go really fast. If I feel like if you focus too much on it, then you're too worried about the details. Just run your brush through it messily. Does that make sense? Messily? Is messily a word? I'm not sure. So just run through it. You know, look at your reference picture. And there were areas of the mountain that weren't completely white on the right side, just because they were still kind of under shadows, right? So go in, add those details, and we'll go back in and add that really, white snow. Don't forget that you still have some snow on the very right side, kind of at the back of the mountain. So we want to add some snow there. It's going to be messy. And like I said, don't focus on the details because we're still going to add, the really white snow. And even after adding the white snow, that's when we'll go back and add some of those smaller shadow details. Once we're done adding all that off-white that's mixed with brown pretty much, we're going to go in with a dry brush and add white. It's not mixed with any brown. It's not going to be super runny, just straight from the palette, and run it through with a dry brush. So we have that kind of like a slide if you look at the reference picture, and that's what's going to fill in that last white line that we left. And just go in and run it through all the places that you see the light hit. Remember that snow isn't perfect. It doesn't fall perfectly, and it's just not perfect in nature. So while you're running your brush through it, just do that. Look at the reference photo as a guide. It doesn't have to be exactly like it. Here, I added some white to the sky, mostly because white gouache by itself is really expensive, and I hate when any of it goes to waste. I'm not a wasteful person. Any paints on my palettes, I try to reuse them, so I added a few drops of water and kind of added them to the sky to add that wintry, snowy effect. At the last minute, I decided that I did want more snow on that hill, so I went in and I added some white snow to it. And when I added that snow, I kind of realized that I wanted a little bit more snow on the mountain. And, as you go, you'll kind of figure it out. You'll go back and fix a few things. So I went in and I added just a little bit more snow before I went in and added kind of the more detailed details. So like the shadows, the cracks within the mountains, and all that good stuff. Once I was done adding all that extra snow and extra clouds to the sky, I went in with a very fine brush, dipped it in some black, and I started adding some of the details. So I cleaned up that break in the mountain and added cracks to the mountain, where the rock is breaking, or even some of the darker shadowing of crevices and tiny caves, anything that you would normally see on a rocky mountain. Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but just remember this doesn't have to be perfect. It's not perfect at all. So, if you just want to take the lead from here and not look at your reference photos and just add the shadowing that you think looks best, feel free to do so. I usually do that. I don't go, by the reference picture entirely. I take glances at it and I just kind of go in and add the details that I think would look best on my painting because, once again, I'm a beginner myself and it doesn't have to be realistic. This is just a very rough painting of what I think it should look like. It's not, realism, I guess you could say. So once I added those details to the mountain, I went over back to the hill and I started, roughly outlining some black in there. That was not part of the original plan, but I thought, you know what, there's some rock in there, there's some dirt. Let me go ahead and add those details. When I added those details to the hills, I was like, you know what, trees would look really good. So what did I do? I went back in and I added trees because in the reference picture, you see some very far distant small trees. So that's exactly what I did. And I feel like it definitely completed my painting. Once you add those trees, make sure that your painting dries completely. And don't worry about the trees being perfect. I mean, they're just a touch, right? You can just spread them out as much as you want. All right, and now you are done. Once it's dry, go ahead and peel off the tape. Very carefully, you don't want to tear off any pieces. Thanks so much for watching and following along. I would love to see your results, so make sure to tag me on social media. My Instagram can be found in my bio here on YouTube, or you could find it within the links below. Thanks again so much, and I hope to hear from you soon. Tag me in all those pictures.